There's a phone number your bank has never given you. When you call the regular number, you wait on hold for 37 minutes listening to the same jazz loop on repeat. When customers at a certain income threshold call their number, a human being picks up in under 3 rings. No hold music. No automated bot asking to verify your address 4 times. An actual person with your account history already on their screen who addresses you by name before you've said a word. The difference between those 2 phone numbers isn't your credit score. It isn't how long you've banked there. It isn't whether you've been a loyal, never missed a payment customer for 15 years. It's your income crossing one of 3 very specific thresholds. And that's just the phone number. The investment products are different. The loan terms are different. The rates are different. The entire financial universe available to you is different. And the bank you've been using your whole adult life is running this parallel system right now for other customers in the same building without ever mentioning it to you once. There are exactly 3 income levels where banks stop processing you and start pursuing you. Today, I'm giving you the exact numbers, explaining what actually unlocks at each one, and showing you why missing these thresholds doesn't cost you a little bit of convenience. It costs you a structurally different financial life. I've spent 10+ years surrounded by accountants and fiscal lawyers who showed me how money actually moves through institutions. I have multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars invested. Skin in the game, not theory. And what I can tell you after watching this up close is that most people have no idea how radically different their banking experience would be if they understood these 3 numbers. The financial industry has no incentive to show you the map, because the map reveals that you've been walking around a building looking for a door that's been right behind you the entire time. By the way, I built a free early retirement calculator because most online ones are mathematically wrong. It uses BlackRock and Vanguard logic to expose the weak points in your plan, and I only ask for your email to send the report so I don't store any of your financial data. Link in the description. Now, before I give you the 3 numbers, I want to introduce a metaphor that's going to follow us through this entire video because I think it explains the banking system better than any flowchart ever could. Think about a hotel. Not the concept of a hotel, a specific one. One of those large city hotels with a marble lobby and a check-in desk that stretches for what feels like half a city block. When you walk in off the street, you stand in line, present your reservation, get a key card for a standard room on the 7th floor. Everything works. You get a bed, a shower, a little shampoo bottle. Fine, functional. You're a guest. But on the 14th floor, there's an executive lounge. Different elevator access, complimentary breakfast, evening cocktails, a dedicated concierge who actually picks up when you call the desk. The rooms are largely the same footprint, but everything around them is different. The experience is categorically different. You don't have to be told that a 14th floor guest and a 7th floor guest are having different nights. You can feel it. And then, on the 22nd floor, there's the penthouse level. There is no key card for the penthouse level. You don't check in through the main lobby. You're escorted. Your preferences are already on file. When you arrive, someone greets you by name because they've been briefed. You're not a guest anymore, you're a client. Most banks operate on exactly this structure. 3 floors. 3 completely different experiences in the same building. And what moves you between floors isn't merit, isn't loyalty, and isn't how many years you've been a customer. It's income. Specifically, it's crossing one of 3 thresholds that very few people know exist, and even fewer have ever been told about. So the question this entire video is going to answer, the question I want you holding in the back of your mind through every section, which floor are you on right now? And what would it actually cost you to move up? Let me start with the ground floor, because this is where the story gets complicated in a way that nobody warned you about. In the late 90s, a man named Carl ran a successful landscaping business in suburban Ohio. He wasn't wealthy. His annual income was around $85,000, which was solid money in central Ohio in 1998, but not extraordinary by any stretch. He had banked at the same regional bank for 12 years, had an excellent payment history, 0 late payments, and a credit score that hovered around 740. Model customer by every measure the bank publishes. Every time Carl needed a loan for equipment or a line of credit for the slow winter months, he went through the same process. Fill out the forms, submit the business financials, Wait 10 business days. Get a call from someone who clearly didn't know his name until they looked at the intake form. Negotiate the interest rate, which always came back a point or two above prime. Nothing terrible, but nothing special. 12 years of relationship producing nothing but standard treatment. Then, Carl's landscaping company landed a major contract with a commercial real estate developer. One job. It roughly tripled his business income for the year. He ended up depositing $125,000 into his business checking account over about 4 months. Within 3 weeks of that deposit crossing a specific balance milestone, his bank's relationship manager called him. Not the branch manager, a relationship manager. Someone Carl had never met, whose job he didn't know existed at his bank. This person introduced themselves, asked how the business was going, mentioned they noticed some positive movement in his account, and offered a scheduled time to talk about optimizing his business banking structure. Carl told me the story directly. He said the strangest part wasn't the call itself. It was realizing that the call had theoretically been available to him for 12 years, and nobody had mentioned it. He hadn't changed as a person. He hadn't become more creditworthy, more trustworthy, or more valuable as a borrower. His deposits crossed the threshold, and suddenly he was on a different floor of the hotel. Which floor are you on? Carl had been on the 7th floor for over a decade without knowing the 14th existed. That is the first level. And the mechanics behind it are worth understanding in some detail, because they explain how banks actually think about customers, which is radically different from how we think about ourselves as customers. Banks don't think of you as a person. This sounds harsh, but it's the honest foundation everything else rests on. They think of you as a revenue relationship. Every account has a calculated lifetime value, how much interest income, fee income, and cross-sold product revenue you're likely to generate over your time as a customer. For most retail banking customers, that number is modest. Checking account, savings account, maybe a mortgage, maybe a credit card. You generate fee income when you overdraft and interest income when you carry balances. You're profitable, but you're a volume play. They need hundreds of thousands of people like you to make the math work. But at the first threshold, call it somewhere between $75,000 and $150,000 in total deposits and investments held at that institution. The range varies by bank. Your calculated lifetime value jumps significantly. Suddenly, you're worth the cost of a dedicated human relationship. You become someone worth calling. Here's what most people don't know to ask for at this level, because nobody hands you a menu. Bank of America's Preferred Rewards program reaches its top tier, called Platinum Honors, at $100,000 in combined balances. At that tier, you get a 55% bonus on credit card rewards, interest rate boosts on savings accounts, no fees on certain transactions, and a meaningful discount on mortgage origination. Chase Private Client kicks in at around $150,000 in deposits and investments. You get better rates on savings, reduced fees on brokerage trades, and a relationship banker who can actually accomplish things in a single phone call that would require multiple branch visits for a standard customer. Now here's the reversal. And this is the part that changes how you think about the first threshold entirely. You might be thinking the main value here is the better rates and the fee waivers. That's the wrong answer. The real value at the first threshold is information. Specifically, information about what you don't know you're missing on the floor above. The relationship manager who calls Carl isn't there to make him feel appreciated. They're there to do a financial review, to map out Carl's entire financial picture, where his money is, how it's structured, what products he has, what he doesn't have. And during that review, they inevitably describe things Carl had no idea were available. Investment accounts with institutional grade fee structures, trust vehicles, business credit lines with terms categorically different from anything he'd been offered before. These aren't gifts. They're introductions to a world of products that works differently for people at this level. The relationship manager is handing you a brochure for the next floor and saying, very casually, that the elevator is right there. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you what's actually on that next floor, what the $200,000 income threshold unlocks that most people earning $200,000 a year still don't know about. But first, here's why the path from the ground floor to the first landing is more broken than it appears. The reason most people never reach the first banking threshold isn't income, it's concentration. Banks reward you for keeping your money with them, not for having money in general. A person with $300,000 split across 4 banks and 2 brokerage platforms doesn't trigger any bank's relationship protocols. The same person with $200,000 all at one institution might. The system rewards consolidation, not accumulation. And because almost no one was ever told this, most people optimize for the wrong variable entirely. They chase the highest savings rate, moving money around between accounts for marginal yield differences, and end up being nobody's priority customer anywhere. The practical implication of this is almost absurdly simple. Consolidating your assets to reach a bank's threshold tier can unlock fee waivers and rate bonuses worth several $100s annually. Not life-changing money in isolation, but over 10 years, accounting for what those saved dollars could have compounded to if invested rather than paid out in fees, the gap becomes meaningful. More importantly, the relationship access that comes with it, the conversations you weren't being invited into before, that part compounds in ways that don't show up in a simple fee calculation. Now, the second threshold. And this is where things get genuinely strange. Stay with me, because this next part changes everything. There are roughly 38 million households in the United States earning above $100,000 annually. There are only about 15 million households earning above $200,000. The gap between those two groups isn't simply a matter of income. It's a matter of what the law itself decides you're allowed to access. In 1933, in the wake of the worst financial catastrophe in American history, the federal government decided that certain investments were too risky for ordinary people to access, too complex, too speculative, too likely to result in total loss without meaningful recourse. And they drew a line. On one side of the line, standard investments available to everyone. Stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, the things you can buy through any brokerage account on your phone. On the other side of that line, private placements, hedge funds, private equity, venture capital deals, pre-IPO shares, and a category of investments that have historically generated dramatically higher returns than public markets, but that come with higher risk and dramatically lower liquidity. The legal term for crossing to the other side is becoming an accredited investor. The specific thresholds defined by SEC, Rule 501, are $200,000 in annual income for individuals, $300,000 for households, or $1 million in net worth excluding your primary residence. Cross any of those thresholds, and the law itself considers you sophisticated enough to access investments that other people cannot legally purchase. Now pause and actually think about what this means in practice. For most of American financial history, the best performing asset classes, private equity, venture capital, real estate syndications, have been legally restricted to people above this income line. The Cambridge Associates U.S. Private Equity Index has historically returned somewhere in the range of 13 to 15% annually over long holding periods, compared to roughly 10% for public equities over the same timeframes. That gap doesn't sound enormous until you run it through 30 years of compounding. On a $200,000 investment, the difference between 10% annual returns and 13% annual returns over 30 years is the difference between roughly $3.5 million and roughly $5.6 million. $2 million from a 3 percentage point return difference, legally unavailable to most retail investors. The legal boundary between accredited and non-accredited investors isn't protecting unsophisticated people from bad investments. It's protecting sophisticated investors from competition for allocation in the best deals. By the way, hit subscribe if you like the content. Otherwise, YouTube's algorithm may never show you my videos again. And this next part is the section I get the most emails about. Here's the parable I want you to sit with. In 1984, a young investor named David Swensen took over Yale University's endowment. At the time, the endowment was invested almost entirely in US stocks and bonds, exactly like every individual retail investor. Standard stuff. Over the next 3+ decades, Swensen transformed Yale's approach by moving heavily into what he called alternative investments: private equity, hedge funds, real assets, venture capital. By 2019, Yale's endowment had grown to more than $30 billion and was generating returns that consistently outperformed public markets over long periods. The Yale Model, as it came to be known, is studied in every serious finance program in the world. The insight Swensen had wasn't about picking better stocks than everyone else. It wasn't about timing the market more cleverly. It was about accessing different asset classes, entirely asset classes, with different return profiles, different risk characteristics, and different correlations to public markets. Asset classes that were legally unavailable to most individual investors. When you cross the accredited investor threshold, you don't automatically become sophisticated. You don't automatically get access to the best fund managers or the smartest deals. But you do get invited to a game that was previously legally closed to you. And some of the players in that game are genuinely operating with an edge that public markets structurally cannot offer. Now here is the comedic aside I cannot resist because it captures the absurdity of this system perfectly. The SEC's theory is that people earning $200,000 a year are sophisticated enough to evaluate risky private investments. People earning $199,000 are not. There's no examination. No demonstration of financial literacy. No quiz you can pass to prove you're ready. If you earn $1 below the threshold, you are legally too unsophisticated to invest in a hedge fund. If your employer gives you a raise, you become sophisticated overnight. The sophistication, apparently, lives in your pay stub. There's a second layer to the second threshold that has nothing to do with the accredited investor designation and everything to do with how banks internally classify you. At around $200,000 in annual income, you cross into what most major banks call private client territory. And the difference between private client and preferred client is not incremental, it is categorical. At the preferred client level, the first threshold, you have a relationship manager. At the private client level, you have a team, a dedicated banker, an investment advisor, a mortgage specialist, and often a credit specialist who can structure lending solutions that don't exist anywhere in the standard product catalog. The mortgage products alone are worth understanding in detail. Standard mortgage products follow Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac guidelines. Conforming loan limits, standardized debt-to-income ratios, cookie-cutter income verification requirements. They were designed for the median American earner with a W-2 and a predictable paycheck. But at the private client level, banks offer what are called portfolio loans, mortgages. They hold on their own books rather than selling into the secondary market. These can be structured around assets rather than current income. They can accommodate complex income situations like business owners, consultants, or commission-based earners whose best year looks nothing like their average year. They can offer terms that simply don't exist in the conforming market. This matters enormously for self-employed people, business owners, and anyone whose income doesn't arrive in neat biweekly deposits. The traditional mortgage system was not designed for your situation. It was designed for someone else's situation. And it routinely undervalues your creditworthiness in ways that cost you real money on every loan you take out. The portfolio products available at the private client level are specifically engineered for irregular, complex, or asset-heavy income profiles. Most people who would benefit from them never find out they exist, because finding out requires being on the right floor when you walk into the hotel. Let me give you the mini case study that brings all of this to life in numbers, because I want you to see precisely what missing these thresholds actually costs someone. Take two people. Both are software engineers. Both earn $210,000 a year. Both single, both living in a mid-sized American city. Financial twins on paper. The first, call her Sarah, has been with the same national bank since college. She has her checking account there, her savings account there, a combined total of about $40,000 in deposits. She has a separate brokerage account at a discount broker with about $80,000 in index funds. Nobody at her bank has called her in years. When she decided to buy a home and applied for a $400,000 mortgage, she went through the standard process, qualified for a conforming loan at the prevailing rate. Her rate came back at 4.75%. Monthly payment, $2,086. The second, call him James, had been advised by an accountant to consolidate his banking and his investments at a single institution to cross their private client threshold. He moved his brokerage account over to his primary bank. His total relationship value deposits plus investments hit $220,000. He got a call from a relationship banker. The banker mentioned, almost in passing during a financial review, that the bank offered portfolio mortgage products for clients at his relationship tier. James applied for the same $400,000 loan. Because his income was documented through a different framework and the bank was retaining the loan on its own books, his rate came back at 4.25%, half a point lower. On a $400,000 loan over 30 years, that half-point difference saves James roughly $37,000 in total interest paid. $37,000 gone or not gone, based entirely on whether he knew to ask for the products available on the floor above the standard catalog. That's one product, one loan. Run similar math on fee differences, investment account expense ratios, credit card reward structures, and interest earned on savings across a full banking relationship over a decade. And you're looking at a cumulative lifetime advantage in the range of hundreds of thousands of dollars between two people with identical incomes, because one of them knew which floor he was on and deliberately moved to a higher one. Now, I want to introduce something I've been building toward since the middle of this video, because there's a secondary tension here that doesn't get discussed, and it's the most psychologically interesting part of how this whole system operates. There's someone I know, I'll call him Marcus, changing the identifying details, who is 41 years old, earns around $175,000 a year as a sales director, and has been genuinely excellent with money his whole adult life. Solid saver, no credit card debt, maxes his 401k every year without fail. His net worth sits around $450,000. He's close to the second threshold. He knows it matters. He's done the reading. And what Marcus has noticed, and told me over dinner a few months ago, is that his bank knows exactly where he stands. They can see his deposits. They can see the investment account he keeps there. They know he's at $450,000 in total relationship value. And they are doing nothing, because $450,000 doesn't trigger their protocols. Their system has a threshold, and he's below it. Until he crosses it, he is functionally invisible to the parts of the bank that could actually move his life forward. Marcus said something that stuck with me. I can see the elevator from here. I know what floor I need to get to, but the bank isn't going to help me get there. They're just waiting for me to show up. He's right. And this is a feature of the system, not a bug. The bank has no incentive whatsoever to help you cross into a more expensive service tier. Premium tiers cost more to operate dedicated staff, custom products, white glove client experience. They only offer them when the relationship value justifies the cost. So by definition, the help arrives after you no longer desperately need it. The resources show up after you've already figured it out on your own. The red carpet rolls out for the guests who could have found the door without it. I'll come back to Marcus at the end, because how he decided to handle this is worth hearing. Now, the third threshold. And I want to be direct here, because it's categorically different from the first two in a way that reframes the entire conversation. The third income level, where banks start treating you differently, is somewhere around $500,000 in annual income, or $3 to $5 million in investable liquid assets, depending on the institution. At this level, you cross into what's called private banking. And private banking is not a premium version of regular banking. It is a completely different institution that happens to operate inside the same lobby. Think about Hetty Green. In the latter half of the 1800s and into the early 1900s, she became the wealthiest woman in America, building a fortune estimated at around $100 million at her death, which translates to somewhere in the range of several billion in today's dollars through real estate investment, railroad bonds, and extraordinarily disciplined capital allocation. She negotiated directly with bank presidents. When she needed to access capital, she walked into a bank, sat across from the president, and negotiated terms on the spot. Not because she was particularly charming or socially connected, but because she controlled enough capital that the bank president's quarterly results could be materially affected by her decision of whether or not to bank there. That dynamic where the customer controls enough capital that the institution genuinely needs the relationship more than the customer does, that's private banking. And in modern terms, it begins somewhere between $3 and $10 million in investable assets, depending on the institution. Goldman Sachs Private Wealth Management typically requires $10 million in investable assets. JP Morgan Private Bank operates at a similar floor. Bank of America Private Bank begins around $3 million. For clients at these levels, the entire experience of banking inverts. You don't call them, they call you. You don't apply for products. They propose structures tailored to your specific situation. You don't receive fee schedules. You receive negotiated pricing on almost everything because at that relationship size, you're a profit center worth competing for. But here's what I want to focus on, because fee structures are interesting, but they're not what makes this level transformational. The most important thing that changes at private banking level is access to deal flow. Investment opportunities that never appear on any public platform, that are never discussed in financial media, and that are never marketed to anyone who didn't already arrive with 8 figures. Private credit deals, structured real estate partnerships, pre-IPO allocations in companies that haven't yet filed an S1, syndication opportunities in markets that don't exist publicly. This still happens today in completely legal forms. Private banking clients at major institutions receive first looks at structured deals and partnerships that require minimum investment sizes only clients at that level can meet. The compliance overhead of offering these to retail investors makes it economically non-viable. So they don't. They offer them to clients on the 22nd floor. Which floor are you on? That question isn't rhetorical at this level. It has a specific dollar answer. Here's the second comedic cutaway, because I think the absurdity of the third threshold deserves a moment. At private banking level, banks will actually come to your office. There are people whose entire job is to visit high net worth clients at their homes or offices and present custom structured financial solutions. These people have business cards, they have titles, and somewhere on the 7th floor of the same building, a guy named Jeff is pressing 0 repeatedly to get past the automated system to ask why his direct deposit hasn't cleared yet. Same bank, same Tuesday afternoon, different floors. Now here's the uncomfortable conclusion that the 3 thresholds converge on. And this is the part that changes how you understand the entire architecture. You might be thinking the system is unfair, that it's designed to benefit the already wealthy. You're not wrong. But here's where I want to push back slightly on the obvious anger response, because the mechanism behind it isn't malice. It's economics. Banks are profit maximizing institutions. They allocate their best resources, best products, best people, best access to the relationships that generate the most revenue. That's not a conspiracy. That's a business model. The genuinely unsettling part isn't that banks treat wealthy customers better. It's that the thresholds are structurally self-reinforcing. The people who most need better banking products, lower fees, better rates, better investment access are precisely the people below the first threshold. The people who least need the advantages of private banking are the people who've already reached $10 million in liquid assets. Maximum advantage delivered to minimum need. Minimum advantage delivered to maximum need. And that's not an accident. That's the entire architecture of the thing. Which means the only way to beat it is to understand it and then engineer your own position to cross each threshold deliberately, rather than waiting to discover them accidentally. Here's what that looks like practically. 3 things, calibrated specifically to this topic. The first thing to do is consolidate aggressively toward a single institution to hit the first tier. If you're within striking distance of a bank's preferred client threshold, within $100,000 to $150,000 in combined deposits and investments, it may be worth moving accounts to get there. Run the math first. Model whether the fee savings and rate improvements outweigh any disadvantage from consolidating, like moving money out of a higher yield savings account elsewhere. For most people, doing this exercise honestly, consolidating wins, especially once you factor in the relationship access and the conversations you weren't being invited into before. The second thing is to treat accredited investor status as something to engineer, not something that happens to you passively. If your income is approaching $200,000, work with an accountant who specializes in high-income clients to understand your documentation options. And once you qualify, don't rush into every private placement that appears in your inbox. Private investments carry no liquidity, significant minimums, and material risk. But approached with the same rigor you'd apply to any serious investment decision, the right ones can meaningfully alter your long-term return trajectory in ways that public markets structurally cannot replicate. The third thing is to understand, honestly and without flattery, that the third threshold almost never arrives through income or savings rate alone. The people who reach private banking territory generally own something that compounds faster than their salary can equity in a business, a real estate portfolio generating appreciation and cash flow, startup shares from a company that grows. The standard financial planning advice, say 15%, retire at 65, gets most people to a comfortable retirement if executed perfectly. It does not get most people to the 22nd floor. For that, you need ownership of something that grows on its own logic, not just on your accumulated labor. Back to Marcus. I told you this would resolve, and here's how it did. Marcus couldn't wait for the bank to elevate him. The bank was waiting for him to arrive. So he stopped waiting for the system to reward him and started engineering toward the threshold. He moved his brokerage account to his primary bank, consolidating his $450,000 into a single relationship. He was approximately 2 to 3 years from meeting the income threshold for accredited investor status, and he started getting educated, now understanding which private banking products he would want access to at the second level so he could position himself correctly before he arrived. Most importantly, he stopped thinking of his banking relationship as a commodity to be optimized for one variable at a time. He started thinking of it as a strategic relationship to be cultivated towards specific access points and specific floors. That mindset shift is worth more than any specific rate or product, because the people who cross the second and third thresholds mostly don't do it by accident. They understood the game early enough to play it intentionally, and they move through the floors with a destination in mind rather than stumbling upward and wondering why things felt different. In a real hotel, the penthouse guests and the standard room guests sleep under the same roof. They walk through the same lobby, they might pass each other at the elevator bank, but they're having categorically different experiences of the same institution. The penthouse guest doesn't find this remarkable anymore. It's been their reality long enough that it feels like the only reality. The standard guest might know the penthouse floor exists abstractly, without ever having concretely thought about what it would mean to be on it, what it costs not to be, or whether there's a deliberate path from here to there. Which floor are you on? The elevator's right there. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. And the bank already knows exactly how far away from the next floor you are. They're watching your deposits, your investment balances, your overall relationship value in real time, waiting for you to cross the threshold before they introduce themselves. They will not mention the threshold to you. They will not tell you what products are waiting on the other side. They will answer the phone when you call, and they will process your transactions. And they will smile, and they will never once say, by the way, the elevator is right there, and you're about $15,000 from the floor, where things start to look very different. That's not an oversight. That's the business model.